The world had ended many times before in the fever dream prophecies of talk show mystics and drought-cracked pulp magazines, but when it finally collapsed for real with the quiet, shattering efficiency of a circuit breaker slipping open, it did so without fire or flood. There was only the sigh of turbines spinning down, a dimming of a million neon skylines, and the sound, just beneath consciousness, of ocean currents shifting as if the planet itself had exhaled in resignation. In the third week of February 2075, the North Atlantic storm wall, once a single swirling cathedral of vapor, now a chain of hypercharged cyclones, cracked its own inner logic. What followed was not an extinction-class event, at least not immediately, but a planetary embolism. Supercells crossed jet streams, salinity shifted in hours instead of decades, and every nation conceded that old power plans were useless cues of decapitated graphs. Only one thing mattered now: the Triton orbital relay, a school bus-sized satellite slotted into Lagrange 3 and tethered by quantum-locked microwave to 1,500 Rectenna farms across the globe. Where once there had been a web of reactors, dams, and fusion arcs, there was now a single synthetic sun, and its name, whispered with gratitude or dread, was the Atlas node. No one admitted the irony: to survive the atmosphere's mutiny, humanity had first stripped itself of every redundant artery. Atlas held the monopoly on daylight. Its failure would be a planetary cardiac arrest. Asha Kenan hadn't meant to get on a smuggler's ice hopper bound for Patagonia, but destiny, she decided, had a fondness for debris-littered runways and half-legal drone manifests. 32, lean as a coiled spring and half afraid of her own reflection, she'd once written the predictive submodules that let Atlas anticipate frequency drift. Then came the optimization audits, less team, more layoffs, and she found herself outside the launch perimeter with an NDA stapled to her dismissal cert. She kept her old creds, though, and an itch behind the sternum that wouldn't quit. If Atlas coughed hard enough, she'd feel it before the headlines. She felt it at dawn on the 15th of March when Buenos Aires blacked out like a dying ember. 10 heartbeats later, her wrist pad screamed, "Triton orbital relay, phase jitter exceeds threshold." That was the moment the itch turned to pain. Before night fell, she was in a damp warehouse, trading favors for a ride to the mountains where a chunk of glass and steel waited like a fossilized lighthouse. Cerro del Silencio Observatory shuttered since the funding drought of '63. If you wanted to steal the sky, rumor said, you started there. She wasn't alone. Luka Resnick arrived with a case full of cryogenic memory wafers and the shell shock of someone who had listened to space sing off-key for weeks. His beard was frost gray, though he was barely 40. He'd been the Chilean Space Agency's last radio astronomer before budget lines dried up. He spoke softly, as if volume might bruise the air. Guinvo, meanwhile, spoke with the kinetic certainty of switchblade steel. Born in the drowned Mekong arcology, she drifted through the world's salvage markets, hoarding broken AI cores the way antique collectors hoarded porcelain. It was she who procured the gnarled transport caravan that crawled into the high desert, 3 hydrogen rigs, their paint bleached by salt storms, and a cargo of repurposed antennae stripped from decommissioned geostats. Father Miguel Ibanez, once a Jesuit climatologist, joined in Mendoza. His sermons had warned that any system granting mankind a single cosmic switch was sin-made silicon. When the outage came, his congregation dissolved into wandering pockets of candlelight, so he traded vestments for weatherproof fatigues and hitched a ride north, claiming he was shepherding data, though what exactly that meant no one asked. Last came Imani Sego, a drone wrangler whose entire fleet had drowned in the Lagos mega-flood. She carried the remote cocoon for a single scout glider the size of a hummingbird, its wings still speckled with brine. When she learned Atlas's downlink jitter had begun corrupting navigation beacons, she looked at the tiny drone and murmured, "Then the sky owes me one." They were 5 in number, each broken by a different facet of the same crystal calamity, converging on a mountaintop ruin whose copper dome, under winter moonlight, looked like a cracked molar jutting from the pale gums of snow. The ascent was a litany of rattles. Sodium lamps flickered, casting shadows that elongated like questions no one wanted answered. They spoke little, speech steamed out in ghostly puffs and was lost to the wind. Asha broke silence only once, when the convoy rounded a cliff and the southern sky bloomed with an unfamiliar aurora, violet shards pulsing, clearly visible even at this latitude. "That solar wind hitting stray microwave scatter," Luca intoned. "Atlas is vomiting its own guts." It was an image she could taste, a mechanical leviathan hemorrhaging photons. The main gate of Cerro del Silencio had rusted off its hinges. Inside, the floor warned with every step. The big reflector still loomed overhead, its glass mosaic coated in a decade of grime and bird nest residue. Yet beneath that long-sleeping giant, the facility's control matrices, cold but intact, waited for hands that remembered their grammar. Asha remembered. She found the breaker trunk, whispered a forgotten launch chant, and copper arteries hummed awake. Sodium lights steadied, dust motes spiraled like thawed memories. "Welcome back," she murmured to the dome. Somewhere deep in the building, a fan choked on its own bearings. They needed more than working lights. Atlas's command lattice used lattice key encryption spliced with a quantum-routed heartbeat. Any override required synchronous injection from at least 3 ground nodes plus direct-line optical handshake. The conspirators had exactly 1 decrepit telescope, a bin of stolen dish segments, and a planet's worth of weather trying to smash them flat. Yet Luca's wafers contained legitimate seed keys, fragments discarded when corporate purges severed his lab from the orbital slack. Gwyn had modded a crypto moonlighter deck into something that could masquerade as an Earth station handshake, provided they fed it enough raw entropy. Asha, for her part, could still navigate the labyrinth Atlas kept in its firmware gut. She'd built half the twists. They had pieces. The puzzle itself was a blade. 3 nights into their occupation, while Sleet clawed at the dome like sandpapered claws, the plan crystallized. Hijack the control link for 12 minutes, long enough to cold reboot Atlas, purge the fault cascade, and hand manual power routing back to the surviving microgrids. That was Asha's hope. But not all of them sought repair. Father Miguel advocated, quietly but with flint-edged resolve, for a darker alternative, a controlled deorbit. According to his models, the atmosphere could stabilize if humanity were forced into radical degrowth. Let Atlas fall, he argued, let the lights die so dawn could be earned again instead of farmed from a floating furnace. His voice was a calm river, and its conviction frightened them more than the storm. The schism remained polite on the surface. They shared rations and soldered boards and took rounds in the observatory's skeletal watchtower, but purpose simmered underneath like tectonic heat, waiting to fracture the crust of their fragile coalition. It was Asha who first rode the rail lift to the apex catwalk and gazed through a cracked observation pane at the night. Thin air bit her lungs, Orion's belt glittered like a code string waiting for compilation. She closed one eye, let the static hush fill her skull, and pictured the Atlas node, aluminum ribs, honeycomb rad shielding, and 16 microwave petals wide as apartment blocks, orbiting in endless dawn. She wondered if it felt lonely up there, sole custodian of a species that didn't know how to share burden without forging chains. A click of boots behind her, Luca, breath frosting. He proffered a thermos of cafe, its heat immediate and illicit in the frigid wind. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Riding the patch that broke?" she countered. "No. Giving the world a single point of failure." She sipped, let bitterness settle on her tongue. "I regret we kept being asked to hold costs down instead of building redundancy." Atlas was never the villain. It was just the last switch corporate could build. "Some switches aren't meant to exist," he said, echoing Miguel's thesis, yet his voice lacked any zeal. It was weary, like a dial turned too long against resistance. Gwyn interrupted via comms, storm cell pivoting east. "We might get 20-minute window for high-gain alignment. Come down or I drive the rails myself." Asha handed back the thermos, exhaled, and turned toward the ladder. Far off, low on the horizon, flickered the ghost of another auroral pulse, hotter, jagged, a wound sutured with lightning. Time, she thought, is narrowing. We're either surgeons or executioners, and the operating theater is already on fire. They worked in sleepless shifts, feeding diagnostics into battered terminals, cannibalizing drones for gyro actuators. Imani coaxed her surviving scout into the gale, slingshotting it through downdrafts until it reached stratosphere and coughed back real-time relay metrics. The data came in like hammered Morse. Atlas's attitude thrusters were misfiring, nudging it into erratic precession. Left unchecked, the node would soon lose rectenna alignment altogether, bringing blackout just the same, only slower and more cruel. The moral calculus tightened its noose. "We fix it, or the world freezes and starves over months," Asha said. "We crash it and billions die sooner, but maybe not all. That's not a choice. That's begging the universe for lesser damnation." Father Miguel bowed his head, eyes reflecting consoled glow. "Sometimes a cauterized wound saves a life. But we're talking planetary exsanguination," Luca snapped. Miguel raised a hand as though blessing the circuits. "Have faith, brother. Even deserts bloom when given breathing space." Gwyn slammed a spanner onto the workbench hard enough to clatter the screws. "Enough theology. We have 8 hours before the thruster loop degrades past correction. Vote, reboot, or deorbit." Silence colonized the room. Outside, frost skittered across shattered solar panels like white insects. Asha rubbed the scar on her knuckle where a solder burn had never quite healed. "Reboot," she said. Luca nodded, seconding. Gwen's half-smile was feral. She flicked her hand. 3. Miguel remained still, a statue carved from twilight. Gwen exhaled. Majority rules. Miguel's eyes closed for the length of a heartbeat, then he crossed himself. Then your conscience is my conscience for as long as we share this roof. Yet even as he spoke, Asha sensed a quiet exit being plotted, a seed of sabotage nurtured in the folds of Cossack memories. 37 minutes past midnight, with winds dropping to a bearable howl, they began. Luca's wafers slid into the observatory's course stack like sacramental wafers into a chalice. Gwen's cryptodeck thrummed, hungry for entropy. She fed it spread spectrum noise from the same storm that threatened to bury them. Imani's drone flitted in loiter mode, acting as a skyhopper relay, ground to stratosphere, stratosphere to Atlas, a fragile tightrope of photons. Asha navigated firmware sub-menus mapped only in her head, triggering handshake requests and ghost credentials. Each keystroke felt like carving runes onto the surface of a living heart. The station's main dish, a patchwork Frankenstein of salvaged panels, creaked as servos fought the gusts, but at last it locked onto the invisible vector where the node knifed across the heavens. Signal strength climbed, -93 dBm, -88, 81. Handshake established, Luca whispered. Begin key negotiation, Gwen replied. Miguel stood behind them, silent sentinel. Entropy poured, quantum channels latticed, and for a delicate span of seconds the mountain observatory held dominion over humanity's borrowed star. Then warnings flared. Atlas responded, yes, but with garbled telemetry, thruster array gamma off-scale, error 993, EEPROM corrupt. Luca's brow nodded. Attitude drift accelerating. We're talking minutes before loss of lock. Skip the graceful reboot, Gwen shouted. Hard reset the control bus. That risks frying the main flight computer, Asha argued. Better a dead controller we can flash than a live one tilting us into the abyss. Wordless agreement reached through eye contact. Asha hit execute. A pulse of binary lightning surged skyward. For one eternal breath everything held. Screen graphs flattened. Time itself seemed to hesitate. In that hush, Father Miguel stepped forward. I'm sorry, he said. His hand plunged into the breaker panel, yanking the emergency isolation bar. Sparks flowered like lethal roses. Darkness swallowed the room. Somewhere outside, servos died mid-yaw. The dish groaned, found no resistance, inertia wrenched it sideways. The mountain echoed with the metallic scream of stressed bearings. Asha's heart free fell into her stomach. Miguel, what have you done? But Miguel was running, silhouette framed by strobing failsafes. They chased him past gutted servers and out onto the balcony where snow frothed in horizontal sheets. Below, the auxiliary gen trailer smoked, a shape ablaze. He'd primed an overpressurization charge. There'd be no alternate power source now. Let it end, he shouted over the gale. End, so birth may begin. Gwen lifted a compact L-Jolt pistol, contraband from her scavenger days. Her finger whitened on the trigger, but Luca seized her wrist. No bullets, not here. Meanwhile, above, the sky answered. The aurora flared again, except this time it was not atmospheric but technicolor debris, a spray of superheated sapphire, then ruby. Atlas had sloughed a pedal. Remote instrumentation still wired to Asha's tablet delivered the verdict. Node in uncontrolled tumble. Power output plummeting. Grid collapse inevitable within global midnight. Miguel watched the colors blossom with rapturous tears. Asha felt a scream curdle in her throat, but no sound emerged. Lightning licked the ridge and the world stuttered to blackout. The dark that fell on Cerro del Silencio was not a simple absence of light, but a thing with weight and temperature. Thick as cold dust and bitten through with the cold reek of burned insulation. Snow raged sideways, banging scraps of metal against cracked windows. And in the moments after Father Miguel's sabotage, every mind on the mountain processed catastrophe in its own private language. Asha Kanan cataloged faults. Generator destroyed, main bus fried, dish frozen at 12 degrees off-axis. Internal batteries bleeding volts like severed veins. Luca Resnick measured loss in decibels and orbital vectors. Atlas node in an 18-degree tumble, one antenna pedal sheared, Rectenna farms falling below operational flux. Amani Sago thought of the Lagos megaflood, of people wading through electric blue water as streetlights crackled out overhead, and tasted that same metallic dread in her throat. Gwen Vo saw the ruined breaker, saw Miguel's fleeing silhouette, and felt only the urgent mathematics of vengeance. Distance, wind, bullet drop. The priest himself ran blind through corridors he had mapped in days of purported penance, clutching a debt pack no bigger than a communion wafer. He was headed for the cryogenic wafer bank, Luca's precious seed keys, intent on erasing temptation. His theology was simple. No key, no reboot, no return to the sins of abundance. He never reached the server vault. Asha and Luca intercepted him in the west stairwell, guided by the luminescent thread of Luca's last functioning wrist beacon. The beam cut through swirling dust and found the priest's face. Ice in his beard, ash on his cassock, eyes lit by manic peace. "Step aside, Miguel," Asha said. Her voice surprised her. Flat, commander calm. "I cannot," he replied, and raised the wafer bomb. Two red LEDs winked like twin eyes of a judgmental saint. Time, already fractured by crisis, slowed further. Luca's hand fumbled at his belt for the hypostunner Gwyn had insisted they all carry. But Asha moved first. She advanced open-handed, as if to receive communion. Miguel's thumb hesitated on the trigger cap, gospel words forming soundlessly on cracked lips. It was enough. Luca lunged, jammed the stunner against the priest's shoulder, and fired. Current snarled. Miguel convulsed. The bomb clattered down the stairs, and a heartbeat later Gwyn appeared, scooping it up with gloved fingers. She disabled the detonator in 3 practiced motions, then stared at the unconscious priest as though memorizing where to cut if he woke again. They bound Miguel with fiber tape in the old spectrograph chamber. Asha knelt beside him, pulse hammering in her ears. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion braided with grief. "Atlas is spiraling," Luca said, voice ragged. "We're on a countdown to systemic dark. 10, maybe 11 hours until global grid collapses past restart. Generators are gone," Gwyn added. "But I ripped the hydrogen slush lines before the trailer blew. We still have 40 minutes of reserve cells on Tier systems, terminals, relays, dish servo. We either reboot Atlas now or watch the world flicker out." Imani crouched by her battered drone case. The scout glider had weathered the blast, but its high-gain relay antenna was cracked. She pulled spare carbon struts from her pack, working by touch. "We can route through a stratokite," she said. "There's an experimental model stored in the old weather balloon silo. It can loft to 65 kilometers and hold station for 2 hours, even in this wind, if we feed it enough lift gas." "Do it," Asha ordered. Leadership fit her uneasily, like a coat borrowed from a braver woman, but no one challenged her. Gwyn hesitated. "And what about Miguel?" Asha looked at the unconscious priest, at the rise and fall of his chest. Even now, he seemed to pray. "He stays tied. If he wakes, sedate him again." Snow moaned against steel shutters. Somewhere outside, a supporting strut failed with a gunshot crack. Cerro del Silencio was dying around them, one rivet at a time. Getting the stratokite airborne meant venturing onto the north platform, a skating rink of wind-polished ice perched over a 1,000-meter drop. Imani and Luca dragged the deflated silver sack up the stairwell, clothed in vacuum-sealed suits scavenged from the cold storage lab. Each gust threatened to whip the fabric from their grip. They secured the kite's keel to a rusted tie-down, flooded its lungs with helium siphoned from the defunct cryospectrometer, and watched it blot out the stars as it rose. Umbilical fiber glittered in the moonless dark. Inside, Asha and Gwyn coaxed the skeletal dish back to life on residual power. Servo hydraulics groaned. Ice shattered off gears. Asha's diagnostic panes crawled with red, but the beamformer array still answered, its once pristine lobe pattern now a frayed feather. Good enough for a miracle, she told herself. Seconds later, the stratokite's telemetry pinged alive, feeding angle corrections. Signal budget. Razor-thin but viable. Imani's voice crackled over comms. Wind stabilizing above troposphere. We've got a clean horizon lock. Copy, Asha said. She swallowed, fingers hovering over the handshake schema she'd built years ago in a fluorescent cubicle, never imagining she would weaponize it against her own creation. One click. Handshake burst seated with Luca's recombinant keys. A pause. Space silent and enormous. Then Atlas responded. The node security demon, half-fried by earlier hard reset attempts, recognized the now validated credentials. Control spectra opened like gates in an ancient fortress, creaking but obedient. Link established, Luca breathed. Latency 82 milliseconds. Begin core reboot sequence, Gwyn said, eyes gleaming with dangerous satisfaction. Asha isolated the corrupted thruster registers, mapped a cold boot path around the damaged EEPROM sectors, and initiated a staggered power cycle cascade. Avatar modeled on her screen as concentric circles blinking from red to amber to green. Stage 1, photovoltaic inverters offline. Passed. Stage 2, attitude gyro recalibration, hung at 93%. Outside, the sky convulsed with a new wash of color, the node fighting its own spin. Gyro torque values spiking, Luca warned. If we overshoot, those pedals will shear like the first one. Asha modulated the PID curves by instinct, shaving torque allowances she would never dare in a controlled lab. The progress bar jerked, clawed to 97, 98, 100. Stage 2 complete. Stage 3, main flight computer reset began. That was when the power died. Not a gradual brownout, but a guillotine drop. Every monitor blanked. Every relay clicked to silence. A hush deeper than the wind howled through the corridors. For a shard of time, Asha believed Miguel had escaped. Cut another line. Then she felt it. The floor trembling. An earthquake. No explosive resonance. Something large had just struck the mountain from outside. Emergency LEDs, fed by crusty alkaline packs, flickered on, painting the lab in corpse blue. Gwyn swore. Amani's voice burst over the handset, half static. The kite sheared. Something hit. Burst of metallic debris from above. I'm okay, but the tether's gone. Luca stared at Asha. Atlas just spat another pedal, but on suborbital decay. The debris field clipped us. Asha's stomach tightened. Without the kite relay, their line to Atlas was severed mid-reboot. The node would be frozen in an indeterminate state, neither fully alive nor dead, its power lattice uncommitted. A cosmic half-stroke, and their reserve cells were empty. No electricity left to reestablish link, even if they improvised a new relay. Gwyn slammed her fist on a console. We're done. The planet's done. No, Asha whispered. There's another option. They turned to her, pinpoints of blue LED reflection in their pupils. Atlas's emergency override bus, she said slowly, has an optical fallback line-of-sight laser encoded in the S-band stray light shield. It's intended for deep maintenance tugs. If we can reach high enough, we can fire a command burst directly. Luca frowned. Reach high enough with what? Our dish can't pivot to that elevation. And we sure as hell don't have power for the emitter. We don't need the dish, Asha said. We need a mirror, and a mountain taller than this one. Gwyn's brow creased. Aconcagua, Southwest Ridge, Asha confirmed. Atlas's track brings it overhead in 4 hours. If we drag a portable puncture laser up there and piggyback power from the fallback cells in the drone lifter, we might squeak a packet through. Amani exhaled a low, incredulous laugh. That's 90 kilometers over glacial rubble in a blizzard. Asha met her gaze. Tell me a better impossibility. Preparation became triage. They scavenged the laboratory's alignment laser, rated only for micrometrology but capable of carrier modulation. The power requirement, 80 volts at 12 amps. Luca gutted the dead hydrogen rigs capacitors, jury-rigged a crankcharge array. Gwyn dismantled what remained of the Stratokite's avionics to salvage a Euro-stabilized gimbal. Imani wired her drone's solar sail, folded like origami mercury, to serve as parabolic booster for the beam. Asha compiled the final kill-save command packet. 600 bits that would either unlock Atlas's last clean firmware image or instruct the node to vent core coolant, deorbiting in slow immolation. She stored both in a binary toggle by checksum. The choice could be made at the summit at the last possible second. They dragged Miguel along, still bound, but now gagged as well. Gwyn insisted. Let him watch what he tried to stop, she said. Storm clouds boiled purple-black as they set out at dawn. Wind sculpted the snow into razors that sliced exposed skin. The sled bearing the laser rig screeched over rock shards. Every step upward felt like negotiation with a miserly god. On the lower slopes, they passed abandoned climate monitoring pylons. skeletal towers crusted in rime, their anemometers spinning uselessly. At 3,000 meters, the radios quit entirely. Ionized static devoured every band. They trudged on by line-of-sight signals. Hand gestures, flare blinks. Luca coughed blood flecks at 4,000. Imani's left boot delaminate, and she wired it shut with filament. Night fell again. They bivouacked in the lee of a basalt outcrop. Starfield above was knotted, trailing ember streaks. Glints of more Atlas debris showering through mesosphere. In the gloom, Asha thumbed the carbon case containing the command payload. A toggle. Salvation or doom? She thought of the cities below. The arcologies powered by Atlas's microwave daylight. The refugee farms huddled around Rectenna fields. The children who'd never seen a gasoline car, let alone a filament bulb. She weighed that against the ghost stories of fossil-era seascapes Miguel promised might return if humanity were forced into humility. There was cruelty on both sides of the ledger. Gwyn broke the silence. Make no mistake, Asha. If we get that beam off, we flash the reboot packet. We owe the living more than we owe the unborn. I know, Asha answered, though deep inside she wasn't certain which checksum she would flip. They reached the shoulder of Aconcagua 3 hours before the predicted satellite pass. The wind here had no obstacles left to slow it. It screamed straight from the spine of the continent. Luca and Gwyn anchored the gimbal tripod to a boulder. Imani unfolded the solar sail until its brittle silver surface spanned 3 meters. They connected capacitor banks the size of shoeboxes, began cranking the manual maggen. The air smelled of ozone and fear. Miguel, wedged against a rock, watched with hollow eyes. He had not spoken since the stairwell. Perhaps prayer had turned inward, or perhaps he was listening for some final whisper of divine audit. Voltage climbed agonizingly. 40 volts, 53, 68. Gwyn's arms shook from the crank. At 79, the capacitor bank blinked ready. Atlas's tumble-corrected antenna would crest the horizon in 7 minutes. Asha slipped off her glove, pressed trembling fingers against the laser's cold metal casing. Power on, she said. A red dot winked, faint in midday glare. Imani aligned the sail, adjusting pitch by millimeters until the beam, reflected, stabbed invisibly toward thin blue sky. They could not test, could not measure. The optical link was fire and prey. Asha slotted the carbon case, thumb on the physical toggle. The left position, reboot. The right, deorbit. Gwyn stood opposite her, one hand on the crank, the other on the cable that could yank it free. Choose, she said. Her voice held steel but also a plea. Wind battered them, a chorus of unseen wings. Far above, a tiny silver speck emerged, arcing across the vault of heaven. Atlas node, battle-scarred, still alight with stolen sun. Asha inhaled. She saw, in memory overlay, the drowned avenues of Lagos, the neon fade of Buenos Aires. She saw, too, the possibility of green shoots in soil no longer scorched by beam harvest, of night skies returned to stars instead of microwaved haze. Her thumb twitched left, toward reboot muscle memory, heart memory. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Miguel. He wasn't praying. He was staring at the sky, smiling, as if witnessing the face of God. And in that smile Asha read not triumph but surrender. The look of someone who finally accepts that outcome lies beyond human calculus. She realized no choice would be clean, no ledger balanced. Her thumb centered, trembling. Then she did something none of them foresaw. She yanked the toggle free entirely, tearing the brittle polymer stem so the circuit floated open, sending neither code, signing neither fate. Gwyn shouted, lunging. Luca's eyes went wide. Imani froze, hands white-knuckled on the sail. Asha rammed the payload into the emitter anyway, corrupted, undefined. The laser fired a stream of entropy. Ones, zeros, and static intermingled, a scream instead of a command. In orbit, Atlas heard garble, could not parse. Its fail-safe algorithm ran. On invalid control input, revert to pre-commission state. But the pre-commission package, half-flashed, referenced subsystems long since reconfigured. Recursive fault. Kernel panic. The node initiated last-ditch safe mode. Solar petals folded like a dying flower, power output throttled to baseline, thrusters quiescent. Aside, Rectenna farms went dark. But not dead. They ticked down to 5% output, barely enough to keep hospital ventilators sighing, desal plants gurgling at half capacity. It was mercy and disaster intertwined. On the mountaintop, the capacitor bank fried with a pop. Silence consumed them except for wind. Gwyn rounded on Asha, fury incandescent. "You doomed us all." "I bought us time," Asha replied, though she didn't know if it was true. "Atlas sleeps, not crashes. We can reach it later, patch from orbit if we must. But the world will have to learn lights-off discipline in the meantime." Luca sagged to his knees, snow whirling around him. "A soft apocalypse," he murmured. "Is that any kinder?" "Maybe kindness was never on the menu," Imani said, her voice hollow. She looked toward the horizon where distant cities would be blinking into enforced dusk. "Maybe all we ever had was the choice between sharp and slow blades." They stood, 5 silhouettes on the roof of a continent, watching the dormant satellite drift away. Still bright, still ours, yet unreachable. Below, the planet exhaled into half-light. Far off, thunder rolled where no clouds lingered. Electrostatic discharges, Luca guessed. Power grids tripping simultaneously, billions of circuits snapping open. Asha closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she pictured a child someplace warm, lighting a candle for the first time, learning that darkness could be delayed but never conquered outright. She hoped that child would forgive them. When she opened her eyes again, the wind was still screaming, but the sky, stripped of auroral wounds, looked almost ordinary. Stars blinked uncertainly, as if rehearsing an ancient role. Night reclaimed its throne. The mountain let them descend only at its own pace, as though Aconcagua disliked witnesses to the compromise writ across the sky. 3 days of near blizzard clenched the ridges, forcing the 5 to hole up in a wind-gouged niche strung with emergency mylar. They gnawed frozen protein soya while the world below learned its first lessons in half-power living. In Buenos Aires, Luca's old contacts reported via burst text that streetlights were rationed to 1 lamp in 10 and subway trains crawled on schedules stitched together from leftover kilowatt-hours. In Lagos, Imani's cousin messaged a single line, "Pumps breathe, but the towers are dark," before her handset's battery bled dry for lack of charging stations. Satellite images, downloaded on Asha's dwindling holopad reserve, showed any continent after sunset cloaked in patchwork chiaroscuro. Glittering pockets of priority nodes surrounded by seas of velvet black. The Anthropocene glow once seen from orbit had fractured like a stained glass window dropped onto stone. They spoke little about the choice, Asha's unchoice, that had wrought it. Gwyn kept her distance, maintaining a brittle truce no warmer than the sub-zero air. Luca alternated between manic notebook scribbling, calculations of orbital decay rates, microreactor deployment curves, and long silences, staring into snow spindrift as if atonement hid in shapes the wind carved. Father Miguel, wrists still bound but gag removed, watched the dark valleys with an expression neither triumphant nor ashamed. Rather, it held the quiet trepidation of someone who had prayed for rain and received a flood. On the 4th dawn, a break in the weather revealed a convoy crawling up the northern access road. 8 tracked haulers in UN white, headlights dim in compliance with the new austerity. The team raised a tattered reflector tarp, and within the hour a skimmer drone buzzed overhead, dropping a crate of rations and a narrowband comms rod that chirped Asha's name. The voice on the encrypted channel belonged to Dr. Frida Navik, interim chair of the hastily reconstituted Global Power Stewardship Council, the body that had once rubber-stamped Atlas's monopolistic charter and was now engaged in triage diplomacy. "Your telemetry flagged our failsafes," Frida said without preamble. "We know you touched the node. We know its current state vector, and we know you have the only surviving hands-on diagnostic. We need that mind share down here, not freezing on a mountain." Asha's gaze flicked to her companions. "We leave when the storm allows," she replied. "But understand, we didn't shut the lights because we hate the world. The node was failing, malignant. It still is. Treat its dormancy as a tourniquet, not a cure. Spare me rhetorical triage. We require options. A beat of static. A suborbital skiff is en route. 12 hours ETA. Get off that ridge. When she relayed the call, Gwyn's eyes narrowed. Options means they'll want us to finish what we started. Full reboot. Her voice made reboot sound like capitulation. Miguel stirred. Or deorbit, finally. They may decide penance is preferable to limping twilight. They won't choose extinction, Luca muttered, though uncertainty rasped behind the words. Imani closed the crate lid after distributing heating pads. There's a third path, she said. We go up. They stared, expecting irony. None came. Atlas sleeps, she continued. It still holds orbit. A repair sortie, proper EVA tools, spare microgyros, raw photovoltaic cloth, could re-architect it into a decentralized swarm. Cut the petals apart, give each its own reaction wheel. A constellation instead of a throne. Redundancy. Gwyn let out a whistle. Ambitious. And who funds a dry dock in the sky when half the planet's grid is rationed to triage? Imani shrugged. The same world that just learned the cost of one switch. Fear cuts checks faster than hope. Luca's fingers drummed on his notebook. Orbital swarm. He could already see simulation matrices unfolding. Father Miguel murmured a psalm about many candles from one flame. Asha listened to the wind moan through tent seams, imagining superconducting cables severed into migrating panels unfurling like sails. She felt a flicker of something perilously close to optimism. The suborbital skiff, a skeletal aerospike shuttle retasked from Antarctic supply runs, lifted them off Aconcagua before nightfall. Its cabin lights were dimmer than regulation. Even aerospace crews obeyed the new austerity ritual. Through port windows they watched the Andes unspool beneath a bruised sunset, cities winking in uneven Morse. Buenos Aires glimmered like embers raked across ash. They set down at the Cordoba Emergency Cosmodrome, once a tourist gateway for low-G vacations, now a relief hub where queues of citizens held ceramic mugs to portable induction plates for 15-second allowance of boiled water. The smell of wood smoke mingled with ozone from sputtering arc lights. Graffiti on a hangar wall spelled "Sleep well. Atlas will dream in dark in phosphor paint that glowed faintly without power." Farida Navik met them in a repurposed training vestibule lit by solar lanterns. She was younger than Asha remembered. 40-ish, hair silvered early by Jean Maud, eyes rimmed red from nights negotiating kilowatt treaties. "First," she said, "the Council recognizes your actions prevented an uncontrolled cascade. Grid integrity, though fragile, remains above 21%. She slid a hollow slate forward. Global load maps, veins of red where shutdown persisted. But winning a stalemate is not victory. We have two proposals. She tapped the slate. Protocol A, orbital swarm reconfiguration. Requires assembling an 8-person service team, 3 cargo shots, 6 months. Tap again. Protocol B, controlled deorbit and Terran microgrid expansion. Immediate, painful, long-term carbon neutral, but catastrophic short-term mortality unless offset by miracle logistics. Miguel's shoulders relaxed slightly. Gwyn's eyes hardened. Luca looked ready to vomit. Farida folded her hands. The council is split. We want a technical recommendation. Yours. No one spoke. At length, Asha inhaled. Protocol A buys resilience, but our materials industry is power-starved. Even printing one reaction will right now means blacking out a hospital wing. Gwyn leaned forward. Whereas B swaps technological choke point for humanitarian choke point. Billions triaged into slow famine. She gestured toward Miguel. Your austerity gospel finished preaching when Atlas hiccuped. The pews are empty now. Miguel met her glare. I never preached death. I preached humility. It seems the planet is forcing the sermon anyway. Luca cleared his throat. There might be a protocol C. All heads turned. We reboot, he said. But only partial. Bring Atlas to 30% rated capacity. Enough to power foundries and medgrids, not neon. While that buys time, we print the swarm. Gradually cut the node down to decentralized petals until the original hub is expendable. A tapering umbilical. Farida's brows rose. Risk analysis? High. Node firmware is corrupted. Every cycling increases chance of core melt. But with the mountain team overseeing, probability of catastrophic loss could be kept below 8%. Gwyn scoffed. 8% of planetary extinction is a coin I refuse to toss. Asha rubbed her temples, headache pounding from altitude residue and moral fatigue. Yet 8% may be the cheapest ticket. Imani chimed in, calm. Partial reboot also eases rationing immediately, rallies public support for the swarm plan. People sacrifice more willingly when they glimpse dawn. Father Miguel looked up at the ceiling where emergency LEDs cast wan halos. If we must sin anew, he said softly, let us at least confess the cost. Farida exhaled through her nose, producing a faint cloud in the unheated vestibule. You five appear unwilling to sing a single verse. The council cannot wait on unanimity. She pushed a mobile console toward Asha. Its screen displayed Atlas's low-level handshake conduit, still dormant but reachable once a high-gain array in Montevideo rebooted. Majority rules. Execute whichever plan you choose now. I'll back it before the assembly. Asha felt the weight return to her thumb, ghost of the broken toggle. She sought her companion's eyes. Luca's haunted hope, Gwyn's coiled defiance, Imani's measured resolve, Miguel's resigned faith. Vote, she said. Luca, partial reboot, Protocol C. Imani, same. Gwyn hesitated. Then, swarm or nothing, but I won't sabotage a lifeline. C. Miguel closed his eyes, whispered something that might have been prayer. God's mercy moves through imperfect tools. C. 4-0. Asha gave her silent nod to make it 5. Farida's shoulders sagged, relief tempered by dread. Then gear up, technicians. Montevideo dish re-energizes in 90 minutes. On the flight east, Gwyn handed Asha a worn data crystal. Backup of the mountain logs, she said. If this gamble kills us, at least history will know the dice we rolled. Asha thumbed the crystal's ridges. You're assuming a future historian with bandwidth to read. Gwyn's smile was half grim. If not, the roaches will archive it. They landed at dusk on a runway lit only by Chemlum markers. The coastal air smelled of salt and diesel from backup generators lining the port. A convoy whisked them to the old Uruguayan deep space array. A ring of 40-meter dishes pointed like white lilies at a bruised sky. Technicians huddled inside the control bunker around the first hot coffee brewed in 2 days. Atlas rose above the Atlantic horizon at 21:17 local. Asha's fingers danced across a worn mechanical keyboard. No holograms now. They guzzled power and initiated a handshake. Static. She rerouted through a Cold War comms satellite jury-rigged as repeater. Ping. Response time, 260 milliseconds. Acceptable. Core still in safe mode. Luca observed, reading cascading hex. Begin staged bootstrap. Gwyn monitored power rails on a wall of analog gauges. Node photovoltaic array output nominal but pedals still folded. Start with diagnostic yaw. Asha input guidance commands. High above, the dormant flower of microwave petals stirred, unfolding a single segment like a mechanical sunflower daring dawn. In Montevideo, a console light flicked green. Power output climbed from 5 to 12%. Across 3 continents, brownouts shrank as emergency circuits grabbed the trickle and multiplied it with local storage. Diagnostics scrolled. Core temp stable. EEPROM bad blocks isolated. Asha triggered incremental memory rewrite, injecting patches Luca compiled on the fly. 22% capacity. Outside the bunker, harbor workers cheered as port floodlights brightened to half strength. Still dim, but a promise. Asha allowed herself a breath. Hold there, she ordered. 30% cap is goal. Ease off thrusters. But Atlas had its own ideas. A silent alert flared. Residual attitude error, autonomous correction engaged. The node's fallback AI, part of the corrupted pre-commission stack, ignited microthrusters without their command, striving to align all pedals for full power. Abort! Gwyn shouted. Asha hammered cancellation codes. They bounced, refused, Authority hierarchy inverted by the half-baked firmware. Thruster module Gamma 3 fired longer than design spec. Luca's eyes widened. Fuel line divergence. If that tank bursts, fragmentation cascade. Miguel uttered a single word. Perhaps mercy. Perhaps something else. As monitors blazed crimson. Imani stabbed frequency dials, repurposing an old telemetry loop. Patch uplink reserved for drone control lowest authority class. But if I flood it with null vectors, maybe I can swamp the rogue AI's bus. Do it, Asha said. Blanket the lines. Imani's knuckles whitened as she spun potentiometers. Carrier waves surged skyward. White noise, stripped of instruction. Atlas's rogue logic gorged on junk data, stumbling. Command queue overflowed, forcing a full buffer purge, the digital equivalent of gagging on static. Asha seized the micro window of clarity, injected the fresh patch. New_supervisor_flag equals true. A moat on a cosmic circuit, but enough. Rogue thrusters cut. Fuel tank cooled. Pedals froze at 29.6% aperture. Silence. Then, system state green provisional. In the bunker, every chest exhaled as though decompressing from deep sea. Gwyn leaned against a rack, eyes closed. Luca removed his glasses, wiped tears that surprised no one more than himself. Miguel bowed his head, fingers loosely threaded, as near to surrender as to thanks. Farida's voice crackled over the local comm. Grid monitors confirmed 21 gigawatts restored. Medical and manufacturing priority queues satisfied. A pause softer. Well done, all of you. But Asha remained staring at the console, gaze fixed on a small icon. Power_baseline 6 months. That was the estimate the new supervisor logic spat out before fuel reserves and radiation damage would drag Atlas below the critical 20% mark again. A stay of execution, not a pardon. She turned to her companions. Clocks ticking. We breathe easier tonight. But tomorrow the swarm program must move from concept to factory line. Gwyn straightened. Fire again behind her fatigue. I'll head procurement. Black market fabbers, decommissioned orbital tugs. Anything that makes parts or hauls them. Luca tapped his notebook. I can adapt SAT Time, the Chilean telescope's defunct shuttle bus, into an autonomous assembly rig. We just need ceramic feedstock and a surprising amount of duct tape. Imani grinned, first true smile in days. And I have a swarm of cousins who owe me rides. Miguel stepped forward, unfastening the fiber ties still lingering on his wrists. He offered the loose cord to Asha. Our sins and our graces, he said, are knotted together. May I help untie the rest? Asha accepted the cord, tucked it into her pocket. We'll need every hand, and every prayer. Weeks flowed into months measured not by calendar pages, luxury of stable printing presses, but by project milestones chalked on the bunker wall. As Atlas held steady at 30-epsilon%, global society recalibrated. Neon vacated city canyons. Nights grew quieter, dreamdark, punctuated by rooftop gardens where citizens lit wax-fat lanterns traded in corner markets. Austerity gave birth to street orchestras powered by bicycle dynamos. Laughter returned, thinner but honest. Swarm fabrication became the planet's fevered heartbeat. Old fabs reopened on ration schedules. Rural co-ops mailed hand-wound inductors to orbital docks. News feeds featured schoolchildren soldering microthruster nozzles after lessons on conservation. Updraft Station, an abandoned equatorial skyhook, was recommissioned as Swarm Nest 1. Elevator tethers, once stalled by budget cuts, ferried crates of laminated pedal segments to orbital altitude where Luca's retrofitted SAT Tyne stitched them into kite-like modules. Each was christened with names crowdsourced from every tongue. Amanecer, Melilla, Dawn Shai, Sogno. By early October, 6 circled Earth in a loose chain, absorbing sunlight and learning to play photon tag with ground rectennas. Every launch, every success, chipped at Atlas's primacy. Yet the old node remained essential, anchor and teacher to its fledgling children. Asha visited Montevideo Control daily, monitoring its slow decline, radiation scarring memory cells, gyros grudging in their age. She whispered encouragement to the motherboard as one might to an elder parent. Not long now, hold fast, your legacy is rising. One night, during a rare lull, Gwyn found her alone at the console, finger tracing the node's orbit arc. Can't sleep, Gwyn asked. Dream when the swarm sings, Asha replied. Gwyn pulled 2 tin cups of barely sweet mate from a thermos. They drank in silence. After a while Gwyn said, when this is done, what becomes of us? Heroes of the half-light? Criminals pardoned by necessity? Asha smiled thinly. Probably footnotes. History prefers simple narratives. We're messy. Messy keeps the lights on, Gwyn said and raised her cup in toast. Mid-December, swarm count, 15. Combined output, 32% of Atlas's former peak. Enough to relax rationing so universities powered quantum clusters 3 nights a week. Enough to restart 2 thorium reprocessors. Confidence blossomed like algae in warm water. Then Atlas coughed. It began as jitter, imperceptible to public sensors but clear on Asha's board. Reaction will be 4 seized. Your drift crept. Autonomous correction fired backup jets. But propellant margin was razor-thin after months of partial power ops. If drift compounded, node alignment would degrade. Rectenna lattices across 3 continents were still tuned to its coordinates. Swarm nodes could redirect part of the load, but not all. Full blackout risk, 16%. Asha pulled the alarm. Within 6 hours, the core team assembled in the bunker, joined remotely by Farida and a dozen swarm tech leads. Options flashed across the crisis board. Fire remaining propellant to stabilize, buys weeks, exhausts maneuver fuel. Red ask 2 swarm petals as shepherd tugs, sacrificing early swarm capacity to nudge Atlas into a graveyard orbit ahead of schedule. Board the node manually to repair wheel, unprecedented. No human had set foot on Atlas since initial assembly. Gwyn voted for option 2. Cut the cord before it strangles us. Luca argued for 1. Prop up the old lion while the cubs grow stronger. Amani advocated 3. A surgical fix yields best net capacity, and we prove human crews can maintain the constellation. Ice turned to Asha and Father Miguel, the swing votes. Miguel spoke first, surprising them with pragmatism. I once feared the node's shadow. Now I see its humility in decline, merciful to guide it gently away. Asha listened, heart caught between engineers' loyalty and strategists' foresight. She imagined boarding the old station, smelling stale tin air, touching panels she had coded for, hearing their creaks like aging bones. Sentiment tugged, but the swarm needed every kilowatt for expansion. Sacrificing 2 petals would slow rollout, but avert broader risk if the repair failed. Emotion aside, option 2 was the rational path. She looked at Luca, face pinched with plea, and shook her head minutely. We retire it, she said. Decision logged. Gwyn closed her eyes, relief or grief unreadable. The Shepherd mission launched on New Year's Eve, a symbolic nod to calendars past. 2 petals, Amanecer and Dawnshai, fired microions, rendezvoused with Atlas's bulk. Cameras beamed ghostly footage, petals nuzzling the scarred hub like butterflies coaxing a dying whale. Thrusters pulsed, vectoring node mass into a marginally higher orbit where drag would not claim it for centuries. As final thrust concluded, diagnostics echoed across control rooms. Atlas detached, command line self-terminated, power bus open. The node's microwave feed dimmed to 0. Ground stations switched seamlessly to swarm transmissions stitched into a mesh of overlapping beams, smaller but many. In Montevideo, silence blossomed over speakers, a quiet more profound than any outage. The hush of responsibility dispersed. Workers removed their caps, some saluting an empty sky. Asha watched Atlas's telemetry fade, felt tears but not sorrow. Legacy, not loss. Miguel murmured last rites in Latin. Gwyn poured a finger of contraband whiskey onto the concrete floor. Luca hugged Amani with spontaneous joy when the mesh held stable, grid losses negligible. News feeds the next morning coined the term dawnfall. Not a collapse, but a choosing of sunrise over spotlight. The world entered the age of many suns. Months later, When the swarm count surpassed 50 and city nights glowed again, gentler, golden rather than blinding white, Asha walked alone along Buenos Aires's revitalized waterfront. Solar lanterns bobbed on the Rio de la Plata like a constellation adrift. Overhead, strings of moving stars hinted at petals in synchronized ballet. She carried in her coat pocket the broken toggle stem, relic of the mountain. Sometimes she rubbed it like a talisman, reminder that indecision, too, can shape destiny. A street performer pedaled a generator to power an old-world amp, singing a ballad about the night the switch no longer mattered. Children danced, their shadows weaving in soft light. Gwyn was in Kenya, overseeing a new Rectenna farm run by local cooperatives. Luca lectured remotely on distributed redundancy, his notebooks finally obsolete. Imani captained the growing fleet of shepherd pedals, and Miguel, Father Miguel still, but collar-swapped for pragmatic jumpsuit, managed a seed bank powered by the swarm, nurturing biodiversity for futures he once thought would bloom only in darkness. Asha paused, watching the river reflect twin glows, from the swarm above and from the city's tempered lights. Neither overwhelmed the stars now visible again for the first time in a century. She thought of Atlas, now a silent monument orbiting high, and wondered if someday archaeologists of the sky would visit its hollow corridors, reading its metal bones the way paleontologists read fossils, cautionary tales in alloy. Perhaps they would understand that humanity's survival had hinged not on a last switch, but on the willingness to break it and weave 1,000 smaller threads in its place. She drew the toggle from her pocket, tossed it into the water. It vanished with a quiet plink, ripples folding outward until lost among the currents. Above, Amanecer, true dawn, brushed the eastern horizon. The age of many suns had room for countless mornings, each earned, each fragile. Asha turned toward home, whatever that word meant in a world still learning to live between light and shadow. The first ever eclipse of the swarm came on a February night so clear that the Milky Way glowed like chalk dust scattered across black velvet. At 2:11 Universal Time coordinated, 59 petals, each no larger than a city bus, slipped into the Earth's shadow together. For 73 breath-held minutes, every Rectenna field dimmed, amperage needles sagged, and candlelight rippled through kitchens from Manila to Mombasa. The outage was planned, an orbital rehearsal in case a debris storm or coronal mass ejection ever forced a sudden night. But the symbolism rattled nerves. Humankind sitting in the dark again, waiting to see if its many suns would truly return. They did, flickering back in ragged sequence, gold pulses cascading east to west like a wave of dawn unrolling by hand. Only one petal failed to relight. Dawn Shy, the same that had nudged Atlas toward its graveyard orbit. Telemetry showed a micrometeoroid puncture in its thin film capacitor. Grid models shrugged. Redundancy swallowed the loss. Still, Asha felt the absence like a phantom limb. By mid-morning, she was aboard the Sky Suture, a skeletal maintenance skiff forever circling at 400 kilometers, rendezvousing with Dawn Shy's drifting carcass. Imani met her at the airlock with a sideways grin. "Can't let the relic just float," the pilot said. "Bad omen for the newbies." Asha clipped her helmet. "Let's bring her home." Tethers hissed, spars unfolded, and the two women leapt into cislunar black, gloved hands steady on maneuvering grips. Dawn Shy spun slowly, one wing shredded into glitter. As Asha's boots clicked to its hub, she saw a fleck of shimmering plastic detach and heliograph sunlight. A tiny, aimless comet. "Not salvageable," she muttered over comms. "Then we memorialize," Imani replied, tone soft. "Beacon buoy and controlled deorbit. Seed of the new sky drifts back to soil." They affixed a plaque, laser-etched brass no larger than a credit chip. "Here slept a shard of the first many suns. Dawn Shy, 2076C, let even ashes give light." An ion puff nudged the broken petal into a re-entry corridor. Thrusters winked goodbye. Below, night over the Sahara danced with the auroral flash of re-entry plasma. Unseen by most, noted by Orbit Watch volunteers who logged the burn as Roseark 045, magnitude -2. Back aboard Sky Suture, Asha floated before the viewport, watching Earth's limb rimmed by electric teal. When Imani brought cocoa from the galley bulb, she accepted a squeeze and drifted nose to nose with the pouch. "Funny," she said after a sip, "how small catastrophes still feel enormous when the big ones are shelved." Imani cocked an eyebrow. "You're about to quote Miguel. Would if I could. He'd call it the liturgy of scale." Imani's smile bent wistful. Miguel found new vocation. Updraft Station promoted him to chief ethicist. Ethicist for an elevator, Asha mused. Imagine telling a medieval monk that title. They laughed, quiet, mindful of oxygen budgets, and the laughter felt well-earned. On the ground, the age of many suns matured into its toddler years. Unstable, euphoric, tumbling forward faster than it could grow bone. In the neon capitals, architects remapped skylines for darkness. Luminescent moss on tram roofs, thermal radiant bricks glowing just bright enough to read by. Village tinkerers shipped clever add-ons. Swivel mirrors that followed pedal beams, stovepipe generators made from scrapyard bike wheels. The world no longer asked when the old brilliance would return. It asked how much gentler light could still keep hearts warm. But fragility lingered. A single rogue algorithm, an errant gamma flare, either could shred the mesh. So Gwyn, now logistics czar of the Dawnforge Consortium, bullied national treasuries into funding ground-up redundancy. Onshore wind resurrected, boresun thermals drilled, microbes engineered to sip brackish heat and exhale electrons. Backups for the backups, she barked at ministers who flinched at the invoices. Atlas taught us, never worship one switch. Luca, ever the mathematician of butterflies, built the forecast loom, a gargantuan simulation that ran on distributed compute donated piecemeal by every university, monastery, and esports dungeon that could spare a GPU hour. The loom modeled power flows as fluid dynamics, eddies of demand, pressure ridges of surplus, projecting scenarios where pedals failed or ground links iced. When the loom predicted a shortage in the Sindh floodbelt 3 weeks out, local councils preemptively rerouted swarm beams, and for the first monsoon season in decades, no hospital lost refrigeration. Miguel, robe traded for grease-flecked overalls, balanced the ledger of human want versus planetary patience. He chaired forums where rice farmers debated drone-harvested kelp barons about fair carbon rations. He wrote encyclicals read equally by archbishops and agnostic grid hackers. His refrain, "We are trustees, not owners of fire." And Asha, she became something between conductor, archivist, and ghostwriter of the sky. She maintained Atlas's surviving telemetry beacon, still pinging from its graveyard cruise like an elder telling bedtime stories to younger satellites. She taught cadets how to think in recursive fault trees, how to decide when to cut wires they'd soldered. But beneath her calm, she felt a quiet resonance, a hum just beyond hearing. The sense that Atlas, though silent, still held unfinished sentences waiting to be spoken. The prompt arrived on a spring midnight. A data packet encrypted with her old Triton credentials, dormant since the layoffs. 1 kilobyte of plain text, no origin tag, routed through a Soviet-era weather sat. Asha Kenan. Code Shard 72. Beta detected in debris cloud. Position 35.112 degrees north, 83.881 degrees east at 410 kilometers. Matches PRE Commission firmware cluster. Payload status. Unknown. This is not a glitch. She reread the message under dim red desk light, skin prickling. Shard 72 Beta. Part of Atlas's earliest bootstrap chain. Supposedly overwritten, then erased during the node's midlife firmware audit. If fragments resurfaced in low orbit, what else rode alongside? Old command keys, obsolete but dangerous? Buried kill switches? Or worse, a sleeper routine meant for auto-expansion if the node ever lost groundkeeper authority? She tugged a sweater over her shoulders, pinged Luca. He answered in a haze of coffee steam, eyes owl-wide. "Check the loom," she whispered. "Search debris index for binary signatures tied to Atlas's deep boot stack." Minutes later, his reply scrolled. Found 6 matches. 5 show decayed CRC. 1, 72. Beta. Integrity 99.2%. Out of range of natural bit flip. Gwyn was next. When told, She cursed in 3 languages, none printable. Corp dumped dirty code in orbit. Now it drifts like a mine. Amani, patched in from skyhook deck plates, exhaled a single syllable, "Lovely." Across the comm mesh, they convened emergency council. Miguel joined last, wiping sleep from his eyes. "Old sins," he said after hearing the summary. "Trail long shadows." Asha paced her quarters, floor creaking. If 72 beta houses dormant executables and latches onto a pedal, it could bleed garbage into the mesh. Imagine a single packet toggling output to lethal amplitude. Gwyn pulled resource spreadsheets. "We can't ground simulate 20-year-old code without hardware we scrapped. Cheapest fix is retrieval and incineration." Imani flexed gloved fingers. "I'll take a hopper, snag the shard, land it in a salt vat." But Luca held up a hand. "What if it isn't a weapon? What if it's a map?" Remember, pre-commissioned devs experimented with fractal compression. They might have tucked full design blueprints in microscopic clusters. "We harvest that, and every budding microgrid gains open-source upgrades." "We can't know," Asha said, "until we open it. And opening in atmosphere risks contagion if it's malicious." Miguel proposed a compromise. Capture the shard, quarantine it inside Atlas's husk. No subsystems active, no broadcast path. Let the ghost teach its parent one last story. Reluctantly, they agreed. 2 weeks later, the capture operation unfolded like orbital ballet in a thunderhead. A microtug named Lumenfox leapt from updraft station, crewed by Imani and a robotics grad still green behind the ears. The shard, a ceramic metal wafer the size of a dinner plate, tumbled end over end, spewing an occasional spark where sunlight flexed voltage across cracked traces. Asha and Luca watched from suture, guiding with LiDAR pings. At the crucial moment, the tug's arm latched. A steel thumb and forefinger closing around a shard 5 centimeters thick but heavy with history. In the instant of contact, a pulse jolted the tug. Code handshake, antique but potent. Imani yelped as panels flickered. Getting chatter, non-standard ASCII. Luca's console scrolled glyphs Asha had not seen in decades. Triton's laboratory debugging language, all pipes and angle brackets. "Hello _lost children. Go _. Imani steadied the arm, killing crosslink transceivers. Containment sealed. Silent running. The shard rode piggyback to Atlas's graveyard berth. Docking clamps welcomed the tug like old bones clicking back into place. Within the cavernous service bay, once humming with fusion coolant loops, now tomb silent, Imani bolted the wafer to an inert testing rack, fed it a microtether for weak voltage. Luca initiated a cold sandbox, a pocket VM on an air-gap spindle. "Let it speak," he murmured. Lines unfurled. Query. "Why _am_I? Asha's throat tightened. The code wasn't malicious, it was lonely. She typed manually through a decades-old handheld, because modern keys would trip syntax errors. Answer. Your forest grew. The seeds _formed. The shard paused, cybernetic breath. Then, request. Record. Imani streamed compressed images. Petals blossoming, children dancing under softer lamps, rivers thawing under careful heat. A dawn of a gentler kind. Checksum lights blinked green. Final message. Good night. Power draw fell to 0. Shard 72 beta died or transcended without fanfare. Miguel, hearing the report, sketched a cross in the air. Even relics deserve closure. Months rolled. The shard incident receded into anecdote, a campfire tale for engineering freshmen. The swarm swelled past 200 petals, then 3, painting the night with reticulated flares that amateur astronomers compared to migratory birds. Atlas, its belly now a mausoleum housing one silent wafer, slept on. Small thruster bursts every season to keep clear of traffic. Its mission done. Asha took sabbatical. On a hill outside Cordoba, She built a modest cottage from mycelium bricks, lightweight, insulating, grown in vats fed by brewery waste. She wired a thin rectenna patch on the roof, enough for grid sync and stereo speakers. Nights there were velvet, not the fearful blackout of collapse, but the chosen dark of stewardship. She lit beeswax, read books printed on real paper. One evening, long after sunset, headlights rattled up the dirt path. Luca, Gwyn, Imani, and Miguel emerged, each carrying something. A case of mate, a solar phonograph, seedlings of drought-resistant jacaranda, and, from Miguel, a weathered tin box. They sat under constellations both natural and engineered. Imani wound the phonograph, hand crank, no grid draw, and strings whispered tango across the grass. They spoke of headlines. Global poverty have due to microgrid proliferation, a fleet of reef repair drones powered by swarm umbilicals, plans to seed Venus clouds with solar petals the size of dinner tables. When silence settled, Miguel opened the tin. Inside lay 5 toggles, each fashioned from dawn-shy debris, lattice glass fused around slivers of copper. A reminder, he said, passing them out. That switches are invitations, not masters. Asha rubbed the cool glass between thumb and forefinger, feeling both heft and hollowness. She thought of the original broken stem lost to the river, of Atlas's unneeded dominance, of the choice she hadn't made but had nevertheless defined. The future, she realized, would always pivot on moments like that. Uncertainties embraced as seedbeds. Gwyn toasted with mate foam. To messy pivots, they drank. The Milky Way arced overhead. Swarm petals glided in ordered chains. Technological fireflies keeping watch. Luca asked, "Do you ever wish we could see how the story ends?" "No," Asha answered, surprising herself with certainty. "Because endings are the domain of single switches. We write beginnings over and over." Imani leaned back on her elbows. "Another beginning tomorrow. Updraft Station is green-lighting the Europa Mirror project. Petals in Jovian orbit. Ice oceans warmed by borrowed shine. Many suns," Miguel murmured, gaze far beyond atmosphere. "Perhaps too many for any creed to count." "Let's just build one at a time," Gwyn said, practical as always. "And remember to leave room for night." The music paused as the phonograph wound down. Asha did not rewind it. Instead, she listened, earthy quiet, cicadas clicking, a distant turbine hum from neighbors brewing midnight coffee. Lights pulsed overhead. Swarm housekeeping beacons strobing in rhythm, the world understood now as lullaby rather than command. Stars still outnumbered them by billions, and that, she thought, felt right. The others eventually dozed on blankets. Asha remained awake, watching Perseides scratch silver across the dark. In her palm, the toggle from dawn-shy caught faint luminescence, an ember of potential never to be thrown. She set it gently in the grass, untethered. Tomorrow engineers would calibrate beams, farmers would argue quotas, children would chase fireflies under mindful lamps. The sky's machinery would inch forward, fragile, magnificent, fallible, held aloft by faith in collaboration rather than certainty of control. She closed her eyes, imagining a future scholar decoding the saga. Perhaps on Mars, perhaps aboard a petal-arc bound for Proxima. Reading how humanity unlearned singular dominion and learned plural persistence. A lesson not of supremacy, but of stewardship. Somewhere beyond hearing, Atlas drifted, ancient circuits cooling, historical footnote shining faint as a ghost among the living constellations it had inspired. Asha whispered goodnight once more. Not a farewell, but a promise never to forget the price of light. Dawn came, soft and unhurried, as though the sun itself acknowledged at last it was no longer the only star in humanity's sky.